Alternative history. What if Germany had won World War II? The turning points. Where could Germany have won? September 1939. The war begins. Germany invades Poland. Within weeks, the Polish army capitulates and Europe is engulfed in war. But let's imagine, what key moments could have led to Germany's victory? Invasion of Britain. Operation Sea Lion. Hitler planned to invade Britain but failed in the Battle of Britain. The Royal Air Force, RAF, and the British Navy managed to repel the German offensive, and the bombings failed to break British morale. But what if the Luftwaffe had achieved complete air dominance? Scenario 1. German aircraft destroy key RAF airfields, paralyzing British aviation, allowing German troops to land on the southern coast. Scenario 2. Instead of wasting resources bombing London, Germany focuses on eliminating military infrastructure, leaving Britain defenseless against invasion. In this scenario, Britain could have capitulated by 1941. Winston Churchill might have been forced to flee to Canada, and the government could have entered peace negotiations with Hitler. What would the consequences be? The U.S. loses a crucial European ally. Germany gains control of the British Navy, making it the dominant force in the Atlantic. The Soviet Union, a collapse in 1941. Germany invaded the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, but Operation Barbarossa stalled. The Red Army proved more resilient than expected, and harsh weather combined with overextended supply lines worked against the Wehrmacht. But let's change one key event. Germany doesn't waste time in Kiev and Leningrad, but instead directs all major forces toward Moscow. The winter of 1941 is milder, allowing the Wehrmacht to advance without heavy losses. The Soviet capital falls. Stalin either dies or is forced to flee to Siberia. In this scenario, the Soviet leadership is thrown into chaos, and high-ranking commanders could fight for power. A new government might even seek peace to preserve what remains of Soviet territory. What are the consequences? Germany gains full control over European Russia, securing oil from the Caucasus and resources from the Urals. Soviet resistance weakens, shifting the war further east. The U.S. The last hope? In real history, the U.S. entered the war in December 1941 after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. But what if Germany and Japan had coordinated their strategies differently? Instead of delaying the opening of a second front, Germany and Japan develop a joint strategy to pressure the U.S. from both sides. Japan doesn't just attack Pearl Harbor, it follows up with an invasion of Hawaii and attempts strikes on the U.S. West Coast. Germany intensifies the Battle of the Atlantic, blocking supply routes and attacking American convoys. If the U.S. were isolated, without strong allies, they might have found it impossible to sustain a two-front war. In this case, Germany would have had every opportunity to consolidate power in Europe while Japan dominated the Pacific. In this scenario, World War II could have ended in 1945 with an Axis victory. What would a German-controlled world look like? The political order of a new world. Nazi Germany would likely have established a regime of total control over Europe. Britain would have become a puppet state governed by collaborators. France would have been split between Vichy rule and direct German administration. The Soviet Union would have been fragmented into occupied zones, controlled through German military governance. The United States would remain the last opposing power, but would be diplomatically isolated. Economy and technology. One of the main reasons Germany lost in real history was a lack of resources. But if the Soviet Union had fallen, the Third Reich would have gained access to massive oil fields in Baku, industrial production in the Urals, a vast workforce from occupied territories. With such an economic base, Germany could have expanded into Africa and the Middle East, solidifying its empire. Could this have led to a technological boom? Jet fighters would have become the backbone of the Air Force earlier than in real history. Advancements in ballistic missiles and space programs could have accelerated. Personal computers might have appeared decades earlier, but there's a critical question. How sustainable would this world order have been? Nazi ideology was built on strict control, but could it have lasted in the long term? How would subjugated nations react? Would resistance movements have intensified? Could Germany realistically maintain control over such a vast empire? While it is difficult to answer these questions definitively, one thing is certain. A world in which Germany had won would have been drastically different. The New World Order, a world under German rule. After the capitulation of Great Britain and the defeat of the Soviet Union, the world falls into Germany's hands. The Wehrmacht controls Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. Japan has solidified its dominance in Asia, while the United States remains isolated across the Atlantic. But what would life be like in such a world? Political structure. Germany establishes a rigid totalitarian system. Europe is divided into Reichskommissariats, governed by German officers. Britain becomes a puppet state under the control of a pro-fascist government. The Soviet Union is fragmented into occupied territories, Ukraine, the Caucasus, and the Volga, each region under the supervision of a German commandant. The United States remains a powerful nation, but its diplomatic efforts to influence global affairs fail. Germany and Japan form a new economic alliance, gradually pushing the U.S. out of international politics. Economy and technology. But what does this world look like decades later? The German economy thrives on resources from the former Soviet Union, Caucasian oil, Ural metals, and the labor force of millions of subjugated peoples. Mass industrialization transforms Germany into the world's technological hub. Jet aviation and missiles. The Me-262 is mass-produced, and Wernher von Braun's rocket program reaches new heights. However, even within Germany, internal contradictions begin to emerge. Is this order sustainable? Hitler's strict regime inevitably leads to uprisings. Resistance does not disappear in the USSR, in France, in Britain. Can Germany maintain control over such a vast empire? Could the U.S. challenge Germany in a new war? What if internal power struggles destabilize the Nazi Empire? What happens next? Find out in the next chapter. The Cold War between the U.S. and Germany. Following Germany's victory, a new era begins, a global confrontation. In real history, the Cold War was waged between the U.S. and the USSR, but in this scenario, the Soviet Union does not exist. Instead, the Third Reich controls most of Eurasia. Technological race. Germany launches the world's first space program using the technology developed by Wernher von Braun. The U.S. responds by developing new ballistic missiles, but struggles with economic pressure due to a lack of European allies. Both nations engage in espionage, creating secret intelligence networks within each other's territories. Will there be another war? The greatest concern is an armed conflict inevitable. The U.S. develops nuclear weapons. Germany keeps pace. Its scientists work on an atomic program of their own. Both nations expand their military arsenals. Germany occupies Africa and advances towards the borders of South America. The U.S. is forced to prepare a new plan, Operation Nemesis, aimed at destroying key German military bases. Will there be World War III? By the 1960s, the world teeters on the brink of war. Any provocation could lead to a nuclear apocalypse. But who will emerge victorious in this new Cold War? Find out in the next part.